Have you ever watched someone wound your heart, damage your confidence, twist your kindness, and still walk away acting as though they were the victim? Have you ever asked yourself, if God is just, then what happens to people who intentionally use, manipulate, and crush others for their own gain? These are not easy questions, because pain has a way of making the soul cry out for answers. But there is something you must understand. God is never absent when injustice is present. Heaven may be quiet for a season, but it is never blind. What people call delay, God often calls preparation. And when pride lifts a person too high, truth has a way of bringing them back down. Today, we are not here to celebrate revenge in a bitter sense. We are here to understand divine justice, emotional healing, and the spiritual laws that govern human behavior. We are here to learn what happens when a narcissistic spirit harms the innocent, and how God responds not only by dealing with the offender, but by restoring the one who was hurt. Let us begin with wisdom. What was done to you was not ignored by heaven. This is one of the hardest truths for a wounded person to hold on to, because pain creates the feeling of abandonment. When someone manipulates you, dishonors your trust, distorts your words, and then leaves you carrying the emotional weight, it can seem as if God said nothing, did nothing, and allowed everything. But silence is not absence. Delay is not blindness. And divine patience is never the same as divine permission. You must understand that God sees deeper than people see. Human beings often judge by appearances, by charm, by performance, by public image, and by reputation. But God does not examine a person by the smile they wear in public. He sees the intention behind the words, the motive behind the actions, and the damage behind the mask. A narcissistic person may deceive many people because they know how to manage appearances, but no one can manage appearances before God. He is not impressed by image. He is moved by truth. This matters because many victims of narcissistic abuse suffer twice. First, they suffer from the hurt itself. Then they suffer from the frustration of not being believed, not being understood, or not seeing immediate consequences. That second pain can be just as damaging as the first. It makes a person question reality. It makes them wonder if they are overreacting. It makes them feel isolated in their own experience. But education is important here. Just because people do not recognize your pain does not mean heaven has misread it. Human recognition is limited. Divine knowledge is complete. When God sees abuse, He does not only see the event. He sees the pattern. He sees the repeated manipulation, the emotional control, the false blame, the exploitation of love, and the pride that feeds on the weakness of others. He sees what happened in the conversation nobody heard. He sees what happened behind closed doors. He sees how the narcissist provoked confusion and then played innocent. He sees how they used silence as punishment, affection as bait, and words as weapons. Nothing is hidden from the one who sees all things clearly. This should teach you something powerful. You do not have to spend your life proving your pain to everyone. There is a difference between healthy accountability and exhausting yourself trying to force blind people to see what they do not want to acknowledge. Some people will never understand your story because they only met the performer, not the person behind the performance. But God met both. God saw both, and that means your healing cannot depend on public validation. It must rest on divine truth. Now, this does not mean you should become passive, weak, or disconnected from wisdom. It does not mean you never set boundaries, never speak up, or never protect yourself. In fact, one of the greatest signs that you believe God sees you is that you begin to agree with His value for your life. You stop tolerating what destroys your peace. You stop calling dysfunction love. You stop explaining away disrespect. You stop handing your identity to someone who has made a habit of crushing it. Why? Because when you know God sees your worth, you stop living as though abuse is normal. There is also an important spiritual law here. Whatever is seen by God eventually moves into accountability, even if not immediately. Divine justice may not always arrive in the form people expect, but it always begins with perfect knowledge. God never judges based on rumor. He judges based on truth. And since He has full sight, He cannot be manipulated. A narcissist may be able to twist the story in front of family, friends, co-workers, or even a community, but they cannot twist reality before God. This is why you must never measure justice only by what is visible in the moment. Some consequences begin inwardly before they ever become outwardly visible. And here is where the lesson becomes educational for your growth. If God sees clearly, then you must learn to see clearly too. Pain alone does not produce wisdom. Reflection produces wisdom. Discernment produces wisdom. Learning the nature of manipulation produces wisdom. When you understand that some people operate by domination, image protection, emotional extraction, and control, then you stop personalizing everything they did. You begin to realize that their mistreatment was not proof that you lacked value. It was proof that they lacked character. This shift is important because it lifts shame off your identity. Many wounded people keep asking, why did this happen to me? But a better question is, what must I learn so that this pain does not define me? Once you accept that God saw everything, you can stop begging the darkness to confess. You can stop trying to get closure from people committed to confusion. You can start building your life again with truth, boundaries, dignity, and peace. So hold this deeply in your spirit. God is not blind to abuse. He is not confused by performance. He is not distracted by public image. He is not fooled by tears that are used to manipulate. He sees what was done, how it was done, why it was done, and what it did to you. And because he sees, your pain is not meaningless, your story is not lost, and your recovery is not abandoned. The first victory in healing is to settle this truth in your heart. What hurt you was never hidden from heaven. One of the greatest mistakes hurting people make is believing that because God did not act immediately, God did not see it. That is where emotional pain can confuse spiritual reality. You must understand that God is not blind to abuse. He is not unaware of manipulation. He does not miss the silent tears, the private humiliation, the psychological games, the verbal wounds, or the slow destruction of a person's confidence. What was done to you may have been hidden from people, but it was never hidden from heaven. And this matters because many victims of narcissistic harm do not only suffer from the injury itself, they suffer from the feeling that no one truly understands what happened. A narcissist is often skilled at creating two realities at once. In public, they may appear polished, convincing, charming, and even generous. In private, they may be controlling, cruel, dismissive, and emotionally predatory. That contrast can make the wounded person feel trapped inside a story no one else can see. But God sees both sides at the same time. He sees the smile that fooled the crowd, and he sees the pride that drove the cruelty. He sees the polished image, and he sees the corrupt motive beneath it. This is why you must never measure divine awareness by public opinion. People may misunderstand your pain, but God does not. There is a powerful comfort in knowing that God is a God of truth. Truth is not built on appearances. Truth is built on reality, and reality is never lost before God. Every act of manipulation, every selfish word, every intentional wound, every effort to diminish your worth, all of it stands fully visible before divine justice. This should free you from the burden of trying to prove everything to everybody. Some people will not understand your story because they only saw the mask, not the behavior behind it. Some people judged your reaction without ever studying your suffering. But when you know that God sees clearly, you stop living as a prisoner of human misunderstanding. You begin to realize that validation from people is not the foundation of justice. Divine sight is, and because God sees, he also responds. Not always in the way human anger wants, but always in the way divine wisdom requires. God's response begins first with you. He starts by calling you out of confusion. He starts by reminding you that what happened to you was not your imagination. Narcissistic harm often leaves a person doubting their own mind, their own instincts, their own memory, and even their own value. But one of the first mercies of God is clarity. He lets light enter the places where manipulation created fog. He teaches you to name what happened. He teaches you to stop calling control love. He teaches you to stop calling disrespect leadership. He teaches you to stop calling exploitation sacrifice. That clarity is holy because it becomes the beginning of freedom. Once truth enters your mind, the chains begin to weaken. At the same time, you must understand that divine justice is different from human revenge. Human revenge is emotional, impulsive, and often destructive. It seeks to make pain speak loudly and immediately. It wants the other person to feel exactly what you felt, in the same intensity and without delay. But God does not govern by wounded emotion. God governs by righteousness, order, wisdom, and eternal law. This means his justice is deeper than reaction. It is not chaos answering chaos. It is truth answering evil. And because of that, God's justice is always more complete than human revenge could ever be. A wounded person often says, I want God to get them back. But what you must learn is that God is not interested merely in getting someone back. He is interested in exposing what is false, correcting what is crooked, allowing consequences to mature, and restoring what evil tried to destroy. Human revenge focuses almost entirely on the offender. Divine justice includes the offender, but it also includes the healing of the wounded, the revealing of truth, the breaking of unhealthy cycles, and the restoration of purpose. In other words, God's justice is not small, it is not petty, it is not shallow. It does not simply ask, how can I make them hurt? It asks, how can righteousness be established? That is why delay should never be confused with denial. Sometimes people think that because the narcissist still seems successful, admired, influential, or untouched, then justice has failed. Not so. A delay is often the space where consequences are still developing. Pride takes time to reveal itself fully. Deception takes time to collapse under its own weight. False images can survive for a season, but they cannot endure forever without character to sustain them. God does not need to rush. Truth has patience because truth knows it will stand at the end. And here is where wisdom must guide your heart. If you become obsessed with revenge, you can accidentally remain tied to the very person who hurt you. Your emotions stay trapped, your thoughts stay occupied. Your future stays delayed because your inner life is still revolving around the offender. But divine justice invites you to release that burden. It tells you that your job is not to become judge, jury, and executioner. Your job is to heal, to learn, to regain dignity, and to walk in freedom. God's job is justice. When you understand this, you begin to shift from bitterness to strength. You stop feeding on fantasies of destruction, and you start feeding on truth, growth, and restoration. The beauty of divine justice is that it does not require you to poison yourself in order to prove your pain mattered. Your pain mattered the moment God saw it. Your tears mattered the moment they fell. Your brokenness mattered the moment your heart cried out. And because it mattered to God, you can trust Him to deal with it in a way far wiser than wounded emotion ever could. This does not mean you minimize what happened. It means you surrender the final accounting to the one who sees all things perfectly. So stand firm in this understanding. God is not blind to abuse, and God's justice is not absent because it is not immediate. Heaven is not confused by masks, charm, performance, or public reputation. God knows what happened. He knows what it cost you. He knows what it broke in you. And because He knows, He is able not only to address the wrong, but to rebuild the person who survived it. That is why you do not have to live with your eyes fixed on revenge. You can live with your heart fixed on truth, trusting that divine justice is never careless, never late in principle, and never weaker than evil. One of the deepest truths you must learn in life is that God is not blind to abuse. People may overlook your pain. Friends may misunderstand your silence. Family may fail to see the invisible damage done to your heart. But God sees beyond appearances. He sees what happened behind closed doors, what was said in secret, what was manipulated in private, and what was denied in public. There are wounds that never leave bruises on the skin, yet they leave scars on the soul. And when someone with a narcissistic spirit uses pride, control, deception, and emotional cruelty to injure another human being, heaven does not ignore it. God is not casual about what broke you. He is not distant from what crushed your confidence. He is not disconnected from nights you spent trying to understand why someone who claimed to love you could also harm you. This is why you must never interpret silence as absence. Just because judgment is not immediate does not mean it is missing. God does not react the way angry people react. He responds through justice, truth, and divine order. He watches the full picture. He sees both the injury and the intention behind it. And because He is just, nothing escapes His account. This should give peace to every wounded heart. You do not have to spend your life proving your pain to God. You do not have to beg heaven to pay attention. He already knows. He already saw the manipulation, the gaslighting, the humiliation, the lies, and the emotional theft. And the comfort in that truth is powerful. Because when people fail to validate your experience, God still bears witness. That means your suffering is not lost in silence. It is known in eternity. You must also understand that divine justice is very different from human revenge. Human revenge is emotional, impulsive, and often destructive. It wants immediate satisfaction. It wants the offender to feel in one moment what the victim felt over many months or years. But God's justice is wiser than your anger, deeper than your pain, and more complete than your imagination. When God deals with a person who has lived in pride and cruelty, he does not merely strike at the surface, he confronts the root. He deals with what is hidden beneath the image, beneath the performance, beneath the false strength. A narcissistic person often builds an identity on illusion. They survive by controlling perception. They feed on admiration, superiority, and power over others. But God is not impressed by appearances. He does not bow to charm, eloquence, status, or influence. He looks at the heart, and when he judges accurately. Sometimes his justice appears as exposure. Sometimes it appears as the collapse of relationships. Sometimes it appears as emptiness in the very areas where that person once felt invincible. Sometimes the punishment is built into the life they created. Pride isolates, arrogance corrupts trust, manipulation destroys intimacy. Control poisons love. In this way, many people fall by the very patterns they refuse to correct. Their own character becomes the architect of their downfall. That is why you must be careful not to envy people who seem to escape consequences for a season. Time does not cancel truth. Delay does not erase accountability. Divine justice may move slowly, but it moves thoroughly. And while human revenge seeks to hurt back, divine justice seeks to set things in order. It reveals what is false, brings hidden things into light, and ensures that no evil remains unanswered forever. This is why you must release the obsession with getting even. You are too valuable to become consumed by the downfall of another. Your calling is not to become a weapon of vengeance. Your calling is to trust the God who judges rightly. At the same time, you must never forget that your healing is also part of God's judgment. Many people think justice only means something bad happens to the person who hurt them. But one of the greatest acts of divine justice is what God does in the life of the one who was wounded. When God restores your peace, that is justice. When he rebuilds your self-worth, that is justice. When he teaches you discernment, removes confusion, and helps you see clearly again, that is justice. When the person who once controlled your emotions no longer has access to your mind, your joy, or your future, that is justice. The enemy may have wanted you to remain broken, bitter, suspicious, and emotionally paralyzed, but when God begins to heal you, he breaks that assignment. He proves that what was meant to destroy you will not define you. This is why you must not measure victory only by whether your offender falls. Measure victory by whether you rise. Rise in wisdom. Rise in boundaries. Rise in emotional maturity. Rise in spiritual clarity. Rise in peace. There is something powerful about a person who has been deeply wounded and yet refuses to become poisonous. There is something holy about a soul that has suffered manipulation and still chooses truth. Healing is not weakness. Healing is resistance. It is your refusal to let pain rewrite your identity. It is your declaration that what happened to you was real, but it will not rule you forever. And perhaps this is the part many people do not understand. When God heals you, he breaks the final illusion of the narcissist, because their deepest desire was not only to hurt you, but to leave a permanent mark on your destiny. They wanted their damage to become your future. But when God lifts you, strengthens you, restores your voice, and gives you peace they can no longer touch, he proves that their influence had limits. They were not your maker. They were not your source. They were not your end. God is. And when the Lord becomes the restorer of a life someone tried to shatter, that restoration becomes a testimony more powerful than revenge itself. There comes a moment in life when you realize that pain is not always caused by strangers. Sometimes the deepest wounds come from people who studied your heart, learned your kindness, and then used your trust as a weapon. When that happens, many people begin to question whether God truly sees what was done in private. But you must settle this in your spirit. God is not blind to abuse, manipulation, deception, or emotional cruelty. He sees what others dismiss. He sees the tears that fell after the conversation ended. He sees the confusion created by constant blame, control, and dishonor. And because he sees it, he does not treat it lightly. Heaven does not ignore what hell tries to normalize. Many victims suffer twice. First from the injury itself, and then from the silence of people around them who fail to understand. But divine justice is not based on public opinion. God does not need a crowd to validate your pain before he responds to it. He knows what happened. He knows how deeply it affected you, and he knows the difference between a flawed person and a destructive spirit operating through pride and selfishness. That is why you must never think your suffering was hidden simply because it was not defended by people. What was unseen by men was fully visible to God. At the same time, you must understand that divine justice is not the same as human revenge. Human revenge wants to strike back quickly, emotionally, and often destructively. It wants people to feel what you felt, suffer what you suffered, and lose what you lost. But God does not act from wounded emotion. He acts from righteousness, wisdom, and truth. His justice is deeper than retaliation because he does not merely punish behavior, he exposes roots. He deals with pride, deceit, arrogance, and corruption at the source. Sometimes that means the person who hurt you begins to collapse under the weight of the very character they refuse to confront. Their relationships weaken, their influence becomes unstable, and the image they fought so hard to protect starts cracking under pressure. Why? Because no one can live in falsehood forever and remain secure. God's justice often works by letting truth meet the lie. And when truth finally arrives, it does not need to shout. It simply reveals. This is why you must not rush to take God's place in the matter. Your assignment is not to become the judge, the avenger, and the prosecutor of your own pain. Your assignment is to stay aligned with truth, while God handles what you cannot. When God judges, he does it without error, without confusion, and without becoming unjust himself. That is why his justice is always higher than your anger. You must also be careful not to become what hurt you. This is one of the greatest spiritual battles after betrayal. When someone has lied to you, controlled you, humiliated you, or drained your peace, the temptation is to harden your heart until you no longer feel anything. You may begin to think bitterness is strength, revenge is healing, or emotional coldness is wisdom. But pain, if left untreated, will try to remake your identity. It will whisper that the only way to survive is to become more guarded, more cruel, more suspicious, and more distant than the person who injured you. That is the trap. The enemy does not only want you wounded, he wants you transformed by the wound. He wants you to carry the spirit of offense so deeply that you reproduce the same damage in other relationships. But healing begins when you reject that transformation. You say, I will learn, but I will not become cynical. I will grow, but I will not become cruel. I will set boundaries, but I will not lose my capacity to love. This is where maturity is born. It is not born in pretending the pain did not happen. It is born in choosing that what happened will not have permission to define the rest of your life. The person who hurt you may have touched your emotions, but they do not get to rewrite your destiny unless you surrender your character to the injury. And here is the truth that brings great hope. God's purpose for your life is bigger than their damage. People can delay you, wound you, confuse you, and even break your confidence for a season, but they cannot cancel what God has decided concerning you. What they tried to damage, God can restore. What they tried to silence, God can strengthen. What they tried to bury, God can resurrect with greater depth, wisdom, and authority. Sometimes your greatest growth comes after your greatest heartbreak, because pain forced you into lessons that comfort never could have taught. You begin to discern people better. You begin to respect your value more. You begin to understand that kindness needs wisdom and love needs boundaries. And in that process, you discover something powerful. You did not survive merely to tell a sad story. You survived to become a stronger soul. That is why your future must never be measured by what someone did to you in their brokenness. Your future must be measured by what God can build from the ruins. And when God finishes restoring a person that manipulation tried to destroy, that restoration becomes a form of justice all by itself. There are seasons in life when the deepest wound is not physical pain, but the invisible damage caused by someone who knew how to manipulate trust, distort truth, and use love as a weapon. When a narcissistic person hurts you, the pain often goes beyond the moment. It touches your confidence, your peace, your judgment, and sometimes even your faith. Yet one truth must remain clear in your mind. God is never blind to abuse. What happened to you was not hidden from heaven. Every tear, every lie spoken against you, every act of control, every attempt to break your spirit was seen by the one who judges with perfect accuracy. People may misunderstand your silence, but God does not misunderstand your suffering. You must also understand that divine justice is not the same as human revenge. Human revenge is emotional, impulsive, and often destructive. Divine justice is precise. God does not need anger to correct wrong. He does not need noise to expose evil. He knows how to deal with people in ways that reach deeper than public embarrassment or temporary pain. Many times when a narcissist appears to be getting away with what they have done, people assume that nothing is happening. But silence is not approval. Delay is not neglect. There are consequences that unfold in stages, and God has a way of letting truth ripen until it can no longer be denied. What people build on deception eventually weakens under the weight of reality. A narcissistic person often lives through pride, and pride always carries the seed of collapse. A person may build an image that looks impressive, powerful, convincing, and untouchable, but image is not substance. Pride can perform well for a while, but it cannot produce lasting peace, lasting trust, or lasting integrity. The very traits narcissists depend on, control, arrogance, manipulation, false superiority, often become the reason for their downfall. Relationships begin to crack, trust begins to disappear, their own patterns start exposing them. This is one of the ways divine justice works. God may allow a person's own character to become the mirror that destroys their illusion. What they used to dominate others eventually turns against them. But one of the greatest acts of justice is not only what happens to them, it is what happens in you. God's answer to the damage of narcissistic abuse is not only judgment on the oppressor, but restoration for the wounded. He rebuilds the identity they tried to crush. He restores the confidence they tried to steal. He gives clarity where there was confusion and peace where there was torment. Never underestimate the power of healing. When the person who was manipulated begins to think clearly again, that is justice. When the one who was silenced finds their voice again, that is justice. When the one who was emotionally drained begins to live with strength, wisdom, and boundaries, that is justice. Your recovery is not separate from God's response. It is part of it. This is why you must never become what hurt you. Pain has a dangerous temptation. It whispers that because you were wronged, bitterness is justified. It tells you to live angry, to stay obsessed, to become hard, suspicious, and cold. But if you carry the poison too long, the wound starts shaping your nature. God does not want you trapped in survival mode forever. He wants you healed, not hardened. Wise, not bitter. Discerned, not cynical. There is a difference between learning from pain and living inside it. One makes you stronger. The other keeps you chained to the very person you are trying to escape. And finally, you must remember that God's purpose for your life is always greater than the damage someone tried to do to you. A narcissist may have delayed your peace, shaken your confidence, and wounded your emotions, but they do not have the authority to define your future. Your life is not over because someone mishandled your heart. In fact, what was meant to break you can become the very place where wisdom, strength, and purpose are born. God can take what was painful and turn it into discernment. He can take what was humiliating and turn it into dignity. He can take what looked like loss and turn it into preparation. So do not measure your future by what they did to you. Measure it by what God can still do through you. That is where true victory begins. There comes a moment in life when a wounded person stops asking, "Why did this happen to me?" and starts asking, "What is God doing about it?" That question is not weakness. It is the cry of a heart that has been stretched by betrayal, manipulation, emotional control, and silent suffering. And you must understand something very important. God is not blind to abuse. He is not confused by masks. He is not deceived by performance. People may look at outward appearances, but God sees motives, intentions, pride, cruelty, and hidden agendas. When someone hurts you through narcissistic behavior, through domination, lies, emotional exploitation, and selfishness, heaven takes record of it all. Nothing escapes divine sight. The tears you cried in private, the confusion you carried in silence, the pain you could not explain to others, God saw every part of it. But the way God responds is different from the way people imagine revenge. Human revenge is emotional, impulsive, and often destructive. Divine justice is higher. God does not lose control to prove a point. He moves with order, righteousness, truth, and perfect timing. Sometimes the wounded person wants immediate consequences, immediate exposure, immediate collapse. But God is not reactionary. He is intentional. He knows how to deal with a person in a way that not only reveals their actions, but confronts the condition of their heart. Divine justice may not always look dramatic in the beginning, but it is always accurate. God knows how to restore what was broken, expose what was hidden, and allow truth to meet deception. That is why you must never mistake delay for denial. Just because judgment has not happened in front of your eyes does not mean heaven has ignored the matter. One of the deepest truths you must learn is that a narcissist often begins to fall by the very pride they trust in. Pride is never stable. It always carries within itself the seed of destruction. A person may build an image, control a room, dominate relationships, charm outsiders, and manipulate perception. But pride cannot produce lasting peace or lasting truth. Eventually, arrogance overreaches, control becomes obvious, deception becomes exhausting, masks begin to slip. The very ego that made them appear powerful becomes the force that breaks them down. This is why many people who harm others through narcissism eventually collapse under the weight of their own character. God often judges pride by allowing it to consume itself. The person who thought they were untouchable becomes trapped by their own illusion. The one who always needed to be above others finds themselves isolated, exposed, and emptied by the same spirit they used against people. At the same time, you must realize that God's justice is not only about what happens to them, it is also about what happens in you. One of the greatest acts of divine judgment against anyone who hurt you is that their damage does not get to define your destiny. God heals what they tried to scar. He rebuilds what they tried to shatter. He restores your voice, your confidence, your peace, and your ability to discern truth again. You are not weak because you loved. You are not foolish because you trusted. You are not worthless because someone mishandled your heart. In fact, your healing becomes evidence that evil did not win. When God restores the person that manipulation tried to destroy, that restoration is a form of judgment. It proves that what was sent to break you did not have the final word. Your recovery becomes a testimony that grace is stronger than abuse. This is why you must be careful not to become what hurt you. Pain has a strange temptation. It can invite bitterness, hardness, cynicism, and revenge to move into your spirit. But you must refuse that trap. If the narcissist wounded you through pride, control, and lack of empathy, then you must not answer by surrendering your own soul to hatred. Healing requires strength. Forgiveness does not always mean access. Peace does not mean pretending nothing happened. Wisdom means you learn the lesson without becoming the lesson. You protect your heart without poisoning it. You set boundaries without losing your humanity. You walk away without carrying their spirit into your future. This is one of the greatest victories a wounded person can experience, to remain whole in a world that gave them every reason to become bitter. And finally, you must never forget that God's purpose for your life is bigger than the damage someone caused. What they tried to interrupt, God can still fulfill. What they tried to delay, God can still redeem. What they tried to bury, God can still resurrect with greater strength, wisdom, and maturity. Your life is not a monument to what hurt you. Your life is a testimony to what God can rebuild. The narcissist may have touched your emotions, your confidence, your time, and your peace for a season, but they cannot cancel divine purpose. They do not have that authority. God is able to take the very place of your pain and turn it into a school of wisdom, a birthplace of discernment, and a platform for strength. So lift up your head. Heaven has not forgotten you. Justice is real, healing is possible, and your future is still greater than your wound.